When you hold gold in your hands, you're holding something that has survived every empire, outlasted every currency, and weathered every financial storm in human history. But here's what most people don't realize. Throughout that same history, governments have repeatedly tried to steal it from their own citizens, not through conquest or invasion, but through laws, decrees, and confiscation orders that turn ordinary people into criminals for owning the very thing that has protected wealth for millennia. Gold confiscation isn't some ancient practice buried in dusty history books. It's a recurring pattern that reveals the true relationship between power and money, between governments and the people they claim to serve. From Roman emperors melting down private gold to fund their wars, to Franklin Roosevelt forcing Americans to surrender their coins at gunpoint prices, the story of gold confiscation is really the story of how states destroy financial freedom when they need it most. The pattern is always the same. Economic crisis hits, government spending explodes, the treasury empties, and suddenly the gold sitting in private hands looks very tempting to desperate rulers. They don't call it theft, of course. They wrap it in patriotic language, emergency powers, and promises of greater good. But the result is identical. Wealth flows from citizens to the state, and financial independence vanishes overnight. What makes this history so chilling is how normal it becomes. Citizens wake up one morning to discover that owning gold is suddenly illegal, that their savings are now contraband, and that the very thing their grandparents told them would always hold value has been declared worthless by government decree. The transition from respected citizen to criminal happens not through any action on their part, but through a signature on a piece of paper in some distant capital. Let's start where most stories of monetary control begin: ancient Rome. The empire that gave the world roads, aqueducts, and legal systems also pioneered some of the most sophisticated methods of extracting wealth from its citizens. Roman emperors understood that gold was more than money. It was power in physical form, and they wanted that power concentrated in imperial hands. During the reign of Emperor Diocletian in the late 3rd century, Rome faced what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Barbarian invasions, civil wars, plague, and economic collapse had drained the imperial treasury. The silver denarius had been debased so thoroughly that it contained barely any silver at all. Inflation raged across the empire, and people had lost faith in official currency. They turned to gold, hoarding it, trading with it, protecting their wealth with the one thing that couldn't be debased by imperial decree. Diocletian's response was predictable and brutal. He issued edicts demanding that private citizens surrender their gold to the state at fixed prices far below market value. Those who refused faced exile, imprisonment, or death. The emperor's agents swept through cities and towns, searching homes, interrogating neighbors, and seizing any gold they could find. What had once been legal private property became evidence of treason against the empire. But here's what makes this confiscation particularly revealing. Diocletian didn't just want the gold for its immediate value. He understood that controlling gold meant controlling the alternative to imperial currency. As long as citizens could hold real wealth outside the official monetary system, they retained some measure of independence. Take away that gold, and they became completely dependent on whatever currency the emperor chose to issue. Financial freedom and political freedom, it turns out, were inseparable. The confiscation worked, at least temporarily. Diocletian gathered enough gold to stabilize the imperial finances and introduce his new currency reforms. But the long-term damage was devastating. Trust between the Roman government and its citizens shattered. People learned that no matter how legal, how traditional, or how necessary their savings might be, the state could seize them whenever it chose. The psychological impact lasted longer than the gold itself. This wasn't an isolated incident in Roman history. Earlier emperors had used similar tactics during military crises. Marcus Aurelius, celebrated today as a philosopher king, confiscated gold from temples and private citizens to fund his wars against Germanic tribes. Commodus seized gold from wealthy families to pay for his gladiatorial spectacles. Even Augustus, the founder of the imperial system, established precedents for state seizure of private gold during emergencies. The pattern was so consistent that Roman citizens began hiding their wealth, burying it in remote locations, or converting it into forms that were harder for imperial agents to detect and confiscate. What's striking about these Roman confiscations is how they were justified. Emperors didn't present themselves as thieves. They claimed to be protecting the empire, preserving order, and ensuring that private greed didn't undermine public necessity. The language was always about duty, sacrifice, and the greater good. Citizens were told that surrendering their gold was patriotic, that hoarding it during crisis was selfish, and that the temporary sacrifice would lead to permanent prosperity. Sound familiar? The rhetorical framework established in Rome would be recycled by every government that followed. Change the names, update the language, but the core argument remains identical. Private wealth is a luxury the state can't afford during crisis, and citizens have a duty to surrender it for the common good. The fact that this temporary seizure often became permanent and that the common good usually meant the preservation of government power was conveniently overlooked. The fall of Rome didn't end these practices, it spread them. As the empire collapsed and fractured into smaller kingdoms, the precedent of gold confiscation became part of the toolkit that every medieval ruler inherited. Medieval Europe perfected what Rome had started. As kingdoms consolidated power and faced endless wars with neighbours, rulers discovered that gold confiscation could be both profitable and politically useful. The feudal system created perfect cover for these seizures. Lords could claim that all wealth ultimately belonged to the crown, that private gold hoarding undermined royal authority, and that emergency levies were simply extensions of existing feudal obligations. King Edward III of England provides a textbook example of medieval gold confiscation. Facing mounting debts from his wars with France, Edward issued writs in 1337, demanding that all gold coins and bullion above a certain threshold be surrendered to royal agents. The king promised fair compensation at official prices, but those prices were set well below market rates. Citizens who complied lost wealth immediately. Those who resisted faced charges of treason against the crown. What made Edward's confiscation particularly effective was how he used existing social structures to enforce it. Village priests were ordered to announce the seizures from their pulpits, framing compliance as a Christian duty. Guildmasters were held responsible for ensuring their members surrendered gold. Neighbours were encouraged to report suspicious behaviour, and informants received portions of confiscated wealth. The entire social fabric became a surveillance network designed to detect and seize private gold holdings. The psychological warfare was just as important as the legal framework. Edward's agents spread rumours about the dire consequences of the French invasion, emphasising that private gold hoarding was literally treasonous during wartime. Citizens were told that keeping gold while soldiers lacked equipment was morally equivalent to aiding the enemy. The king transformed financial independence into a form of unpatriotic selfishness, making gold ownership not just illegal, but socially shameful. Similar patterns emerged across medieval Europe. French kings regularly confiscated gold from wealthy merchants during their conflicts with England and the Holy Roman Empire. Spanish monarchs seized private bullion to fund their conquests in the Americas. German princes demanded gold levies to pay mercenary armies during the constant territorial wars that plagued the region. Each ruler refined the techniques, improved the justifications, and normalized the practice of turning private wealth into state resources. The medieval period also saw the rise of religious justifications for gold confiscation. Church authorities, often in partnership with secular rulers, declared that excessive gold hoarding violated Christian principles of charity and community. Private wealth was presented as a spiritual danger, a temptation that corrupted souls and damaged social bonds. Citizens were told that surrendering their gold was not just politically necessary, but religiously virtuous. The combination of royal decree and divine command proved remarkably effective at overcoming resistance. But medieval confiscations revealed something crucial about the relationship between gold and power. The harder governments tried to control private gold holdings, the more creative citizens became at hiding them. Archaeological evidence from across Europe shows that gold burial became systematic during periods of royal seizure. Families developed elaborate networks for concealing wealth, from hidden compartments in homes to remote caches in forests and fields. Goldsmiths created jewellery and decorative objects that disguise bullion as household items. Merchants established cross-border networks that moved gold beyond the reach of any single ruler. This cat-and-mouse game between confiscating states and hiding citizens created an entire underground economy built around protecting private wealth. Citizens learned that official promises meant nothing when governments faced crisis. Legal protections evaporated the moment rulers needed resources. Even religious and moral arguments were simply tools for legitimizing theft. The only real protection was invisibility, distance, and the ability to move wealth faster than governments could seize it. The Renaissance brought new sophistication to gold confiscation as banking systems developed across Italian city-states. Venice, Florence, and Genoa discovered that controlling gold flows through financial institutions was more efficient than sending soldiers door to door. Banks became partners in confiscation, required to report large gold deposits, and facilitate government seizures. Citizens found that even storing gold with trusted institutions provided no protection when those institutions answered to state authority. The pattern had evolved but not changed. Whether Roman emperors sent centurions to collect gold or Venetian doges ordered banks to freeze accounts, the fundamental dynamic remained identical. Governments facing crisis would target private gold holdings, wrap the seizure in patriotic or moral language, and use whatever enforcement mechanisms were available to extract wealth from citizens. The technology changed, the rhetoric adapted, but the transfer of wealth from private hands to state control continued uninterrupted. This historical foundation would prove crucial for understanding what happened centuries later when modern nation-states faced their own crises and discovered that the ancient practice of gold confiscation could be scaled up and systematized in ways that medieval rulers never imagined. The precedents were established, the justifications were refined, and the techniques were ready for application on a global scale. The lesson from Rome to Roosevelt is brutally clear. Gold confiscation is not an aberration or historical curiosity. It is the predictable response of every government facing financial crisis. When treasuries empty and currencies collapse, rulers always reach for the same solution that has worked for 2,000 years. They declare private gold ownership a threat to public welfare, wrap seizure orders in patriotic language, and transform law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight. What makes this pattern so dangerous today is that modern governments possess surveillance and enforcement capabilities that ancient emperors could never have imagined. Digital banking records, transaction monitoring, and centralized financial systems have eliminated most of the hiding places that once protected private wealth. The underground networks that helped medieval citizens preserve their gold would be nearly impossible to recreate in our interconnected world. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Gold has survived every empire, outlasted every currency, and preserved wealth through every crisis precisely because governments cannot print it, debase it, or create it through accounting tricks. That is why they fear it, why they target it, and why they will continue to confiscate it whenever their systems face collapse. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore its warnings, it will crush you all the same. The choice is yours. Understand the pattern or become part of it. If this opened your eyes to something you never considered, hit subscribe. The past is prologue and the next chapter is already being written.